Hi everyone and welcome to IS Podcast, a show for schools and the wider community brought to you by Independent Schools Victoria. I'm Shane Green. In this episode, Natalie Moutafis explores what parents can do to help support their kids starting school. She gets valuable advice from Rod Soper, an expert in the field. But first, Mike Broadstock speaks with Michelle Green, Chief Executive of ISV, about the year that's been and the year ahead.
Hi Michelle, welcome back to IS Podcast.
Thank you, Mike, and fancy it being almost the end of the year.
Yeah, I had a look at your end of year blog from last year and you wrote cautiously about stepping back into the new normal and hoping we were emerging from the worst of the pandemic, and hasn't quite turned out that way.
No, and here we are. We cautiously thought that there might be a few short lockdowns last year when we went back into our offices and back into our lives. And we did have some short, sharp lockdowns, but then, of course, in Victoria and New South Wales, we've had much longer lockdowns. And I think we're all truly over it. But is it someone who said, I am done with COVID, but it's not done with me? And I think we're all feeling that right now.
Well, at the moment, students are going back to school and staff are returning to the office.
Yes, indeed. And it's beautiful to see the sun shining. So everything seems much better when the sun's shining. What is interesting to me, though, is that we spend a lot of time, particularly last year and over the break last year, talking about resilience. And I know many people were focusing on the resilience of our young people, of our teachers, our principals and others. Hasn't it been a joy to see that we're putting a lot of this resilience training into practice? So if ever we wanted to work out how our training was going with young people around their resilience, we've had a living, breathing example. And we know there have been really good things that we've been doing, but we also know that there's some stretch goals for us going into the future.
So we're going to continue focusing on wellbeing over the next year?
Oh, yes, and certainly ISV has been extremely fortunate. We brought to Australia a program that came out of Stanford University called Wayfinder. And what it's about is it's about students working through to work out what their life's purpose is. The Wayfinder program's been running throughout our schools, and I know that many more people are taking it up again this year. What it does is it steps students through an understanding of not just what is inside them, but also what is outside that they need to prepare for. So Wayfinder's been great, and we will be continuing to focus on that this year, along with some of our other programs, of course, which look to build resilience and look to build people's understanding of where they fit in the world.
And we have a Wayfinder style program for teachers as well, is that right?
Yes, we do. It's called Making Meaning for Educator Wellbeing, and it's a very strong program. The whole idea is for teachers to be able to deliver this, not for ISV to come from the outside, but for it to be delivered in the classroom and across the schools. We do have training for teachers which encourages them to have a look at their life's purpose and the way it is that they are responding to challenges in their own lives within the classroom, but also beyond. So it is a very exciting program, and it links in so well with some of the other projects that we have, the Feuerstein program, the Great Books program and others.
You're in constant touch with our school principals and the chairs of boards, and I know that our education ambassadors have been working closely with them as well. How have they been responding to COVID? What have they been telling you?
I think the thing to know is that, like the rest of us, they are exhausted. There have been so many changes that people just feel that they will do their very, very best up until a holiday break. But that's how they are. They need support, but they've been getting support from their communities by and large. I think also principals are looking to the future. How is it that they might manage in what we are calling the new COVID normal? But actually, how is it that governments will respond, and how is it the schools are going to respond based on government responses? So I think principals are cautiously optimistic, but they are nervous. The issue for us too is that governing bodies have to use different metrics. I've been speaking to the chairs of some of our governing bodies. Usually at this time of the year, Governing bodies will be looking at what it is that the staff and the school has achieved during the last 12 months. They'll be looking at their strategic plans. And one of the things that I've been saying is this is an emergent situation, and principals and school leaders have been having to make decisions very, very quickly in an emergent area. And so when we look at our strategic plans, we need to understand that everything may not have been ticked off in the way that it was ticked off in the past, but so much else has been delivered. Governing bodies should not be looking at themselves and feeling that they're not doing the right thing, and neither should principals. Really, we've done a lot this year, and we need to recognise that sometimes the world looks different from the way that we plan.
Do you feel like your or our relationship with schools has changed over the last 18 months?
I think it's become more so. It's yes and more so. ISV members have always relied on our organisation to give them some guidance, to link with governments, to talk them through what is happening in real time. So they've always done that, but it's like yes and more so. We have had to step into a couple of extra areas, given that we know that what's coming in a way through our discussions with government and with the other sectors. We, for example, were able to very quickly negotiate a deal with a supplier for air purifiers. We were able to very quickly go to Melbourne University professor and say, please, can you do a video for us that will inform our schools about transmission via droplet infection? We were able then to go and have a look at rapid antigen tests to make sure that our schools were able to purchase them as they needed. That's been an unusual thing for ISV. It's not something that we've always done before, but it was needed. We knew that people were going to schools and offering them all sorts of special deals on air purifiers, etc., and that the schools were having to pay perhaps over the odds in a time of scarcity. So I think the schools have appreciated that. I know that they have, and we've shared that information with our colleagues in other states to help all schools. So ISV throughout it all has been doing the same things that we always did. So we've been doing teacher training and leadership training and discussions with principals about all sorts of things. So our relationship has slightly changed, but as I say, changed, but just become more so.
It's funny that we're all heading back to school and we're all heading back into the office just at the time when we're getting a chance to take a break. But yes. I think we need to recharge.
I think we do. And it was interesting for me because we've been able to have some of our principals together. We weren't able to see them very often during the school year, but we've had some of them together over the last couple of weeks. And to see how much energy people get from being together, that in their shared experience, there is not only something to learn, but there is also a particular energy. So I wondered how people would go having to go back into the office knowing, or going back to school knowing that, there was only 3 or 4 weeks. But I can see now that the energy that people get from being together, the planning that people are able to do, the reflection about where their school is going, what's happening to them, where the students are going, they're very powerful things in person. So it's wonderful that we're able to do that, even as we, as you say, limp toward the end of the year.
Any plans for yourself?
Like everybody else, I'm hoping to have a good break. Whatever happens, I know, or I hope, that the sun will shine and that we'll be able to get some fresh air and think about the year to come.
Well, thanks for joining us yet again on ICE Podcast, Michelle.
Thank you, Mike, and I hope that you have a good break as well.
Thank you.
Starting school can be both an exciting and uncertain time for all involved, children and parents. Natalie spoke with Rod Soper about a just-released book, First Year at School, Essential Tips for Parents and Carers, brought to us by Early Childhood Australia and the Australian Primary Principals Association. Rod has more than 20 years' experience in education as a teacher, head of school, and more recently director of Thinkers Inc., an early years school in Sydney. He shares some valuable advice on supporting children beginning their first year of school.
Hi, Rod. Thanks for joining IS Podcast.
Hi there. How you going?
I'm well, thank you. Now, the reason we're talking today is because through Early Childhood Australia and the Australian Primary Principals Association, a revised edition of the book First Year at School, Essential Tips for Parents and Carers has come out, and you're one of the co-authors on this updated version. Now, this topic is very close to my heart because I have a kindy kid who's transitioning to prep next year. So I'm doing all the reading and finding out all the information that I can to help our little guy. So when I came across this book through ISV, I was really interested. So I'm very keen to get some of your tips and tricks, which I'm sure other first-time school parents would be also keen to get. But I know when I was reading the book, it was saying that you really should start preparing 12 months prior to starting school. Can you tell me a little bit more about this timeline?
It is such a big transition prior to school setting. Young children, they might be, in a long daycare, they might be in a family daycare, they might be in a preschool setting. It's not all that often that it's 5 days a week, full days.
No, well, I know my son's not full-time. Like, he's close to it, but he's not. And I know lots of other children at our early years centre are not. So I can just imagine this transition from 2 and above days a week to this kind of 5 days. And they're not as long as some kids are in long daycare. But if you haven't gone to long daycare, or if you're only going 1 or 2 days a week, that's a massive change to your routine.
Yes. And you're only 4, 5, or maybe 6. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
You're super young. And while we know they've got bucket loads of energy, they also don't hold back and go, right, I've got to just hold out for the day, don't peak too early. It's just go, from the minute they're up and running. So there's definitely the confidence piece. And for me, the big thing is around being able to do lots of things on your own, particularly in the year prior to school, going to school, so, where they're 4 or 5, they really need to be doing things independently. You've got to remember that it's often 1 to 25, maybe 1 to 20, it could even be 1 to 30, one teacher and all those other children. So you've really got to have your wits about you. You've got to have those capacities to go, oh, I'm a bit stuck, what should I do? Rather than just stopping and then looking around and going, right, okay. The end. Because we know that they actually need those skills. Now, can they have those skills? Absolutely. But they do take a bit of time to develop. And I think they're one of those things that we often see. They move from not being able to get dressed independently to being able to do that. I mean, that's a wonderful example. So if your child's already starting to do that, great. Can they put on a jumper? Can they put on their shoes? They certainly have the capacity to tie their shoelaces. They might choose not to.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's like, I know they can do it, but there's being able to do it and wanting to do it.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I think it's that kind of understanding and discussion with your child to be able to really help them to understand how important it is that they can do some of these things, whether it's, buttons and zippers and all those things. And of course we take some of that for granted. We're like, oh well, but it's all part of being connected at school because they're watching their friends, and I think it's a wonderful way to encourage them to say, when you're at school, your friends are going to be able to do this. You can do it with them and get on and go and play. Don't be being bothered by having to wait for someone to come and do this for you because you can do it. So it's changing the focus from I can't really be bothered to, oh, wow, if I learn this is going to really help me to have a much more fun time with my friends in the playground and at recess and lunch, and you don't want to get left behind. If you're still putting your shoes on or waiting for the teacher to do it, your friends are already out in the play area. So it's kind of...
don't want to miss out kind of thing.
That's right. And we're exactly the same as adults. It's got nothing to do with age. I think often people ask me about literacy and numeracy. Should they be able to read? Should they be able to write? All that sort of stuff. And I always say one of the best things you can do is just make it known to them about letters and sounds and things like that, because so much, so much. I often say it's nearly 90, if not more % of their day experiencing literacy. And so taking that year before to just have some fun, and first of all, the letters of their names, not talking about writing, just recognizing, oh, look, Mum, there's a, if their name's Rod, look, oh, there's an or there's an R. And you're like, oh, yeah, awesome. And on the cereal pack or on the street sign, oh, there's, they just start to recognize the shapes and the forms of letters. And it's just because what you want them to be able to do when they come home from school in the first couple of weeks, go, oh, we're doing this. We had to learn about R today, Mum. I already know it. And you're like, yes, that's the best answer I could ever get from you. Because it's just that familiar connection to it. Their brain synapses are 1,000 trillion a second. Their brain is ready for all this stuff. Often parents say, oh, well, we don't want to get it wrong, the literacy stuff. And I said, well, we are a digitally immersed culture now. So there's a wonderful, wonderful app that's been put together by Macquarie University and also in collaboration with ABC. It's called Reading Eggs, and you may or may not have heard about it.
Yes, I'm across that one.
It just gives all that really fundamental basic stuff. So you're like, oh, what sound does that letter make? Reading Eggs will help and that sort of stuff. But, don't worry about writing it, but it's the fact that they can recognize some of those letters. Do they have to? Absolutely not. But if they can, it's a winner. And their brains are ready for it. And if it's fun and you're sitting there and you're just having a bit of a giggle with them and you're laughing and they point it out and it's spontaneous and it's part of a game and all that sort of stuff, then it is just natural learning from the most significant people in their lives. So that when they get to school and the teacher goes, oh, let's talk about this. And they're like, oh, yeah, I already know that. So
give them that bit of confidence too.
Absolutely. So.
And I know that I spoke to some of my colleagues at ISV who are in the early years space when I was doing an article for the Parents website earlier this year, again, talking about starting school. And they made a point of mentioning that the reading and the writing and the literacy and the numeracy, yes, it's, as you say, it's important that they've got an understanding of it. But some parents out there have this belief that children should be able to read and write to a degree before they start school, when in fact, that's what they should learn by the end of their first year of school.
You're absolutely right. But the funniest thing is, most of them, if you're reading with them every night and they've got favourite stories, most of them are already hitting the reading mark, because we've got to remember that the brain will see a shape, which is just basically the letters on the page. And we don't go, oh, we're going to read the word read. We don't go, oh, no, that's an and then an eh. We don't do it like that. Now we just go, oh, that's read. We see that word and we just know it. And very interesting, some research that's been done at Cambridge University about the fact that the shape of words, particularly the beginning and the end, is incredibly interesting in terms of how quickly we're able to remember and have that recall of words. And I think the other piece of puzzle that there's an amazing piece of research, Australian research, that actually says if parents read or carers read in the years prior to school, they actually can have their children 5 or 6 months ahead of everybody else who hasn't had a bedtime story every night. That's how that it's two things: relationship number one, and that you are demonstrating your passion and your love for literacy and literature by reading a story. But the second thing is, it's the fact that you keep doing it. And I don't know about your little guy, but does he have a favourite story?
Yeah, he has lots of favourite stories. But the funny thing is, we can read a book. We go to the library most weeks just to add to the collection. And I can read the book once and he remembers it. And he's recalling the words off the page and knows where they fall on each part of the book. And it just blows my mind. And I'm like, I know it's just a memory thing, but how do you remember this when we've never had this book before?
Yeah, because he's loving it, because you love it, that relationship piece, it just is. And I think the second thing is he is reading. I mean, by the definition of reading, he is already doing it. No, he can't decode yet, decode is just simply to be able to pull the letters apart, remember what sounds they make, and then put it back together again to know what the word says. But he's already reading because he's remembering all that stuff. And so many parents go, oh, my child, should be reading. I'm like, well, can they tell you their favourite story? And they go, yep. Well, they're already doing it. They're already loving it. They're already getting the concepts. And they're doing that because those parents are just in there loving it and getting excited and mixing them up and read the words wrong, I always say. And then you want your child to go, Yeah, and say, what are you doing? That's not what it says. Are you sure? Are you sure? Like, yes, I'm sure. And it's all the emergent reading. It's literacy, literacy, literacy. So I think to those parents that are putting themselves under the pressure of saying they need to be able to read prior to school, I think you need to cut yourself a little bit of slack and say, if you've been reading and your children are already showing an interest in literature and literacy, then they're already well and truly on the pathway to success. And for those people out there who go, my child is not interested in it at all, you know what? The biggest advantage that they've got is their high passionate interest levels, so just read and find stuff about stuff they want to know about, around topics they want to know about. I had a little guy who was not interested in reading at all, but talked to him about dragons. They don't even exist, but he knows more about dragons than the back of your hand type thing. But he wasn't interested in a book to read it. But as soon as you say, let's read the book, no, but I want to find out about dragons. Well, the next thing you know, using all that pre-emergent reading, discovery questions, what about this? What's that? Next thing you know, is saying, that's exactly that's written there. And all of a sudden it just clicked for him and he was like, oh, okay. And now he just loves books.
So what else, aside from literacy, would you recommend parents kind of address or consider for that transition?
That big piece around being social, and that's an interesting one given COVID that we're dealing with. Being able to make a friend, keep a friend, how to restore friendship when things don't go our way, that's a big one. You don't need to have the same age friends to be able to do this and to do the prep work. There's a couple of families who they're sort of still a bit on the nervous side of things about getting back out in the community for all sorts of different reasons. And it's about teaching your children through what we often call social play, where you set up a situation where you add a story or a scenario and you work through it. And then I often say to parents, one of the things you could do is ask them about what they think school's going to be like, and let them be the teacher. And then you'll get to see what they're like or what they think school's like. Or you have a play, you create a scenario at home and you be the protagonist and you be the one that is a bit annoying or a bit of a pain in the scenario. As you watch your child start to negotiate that, you don't let them accelerate into going crazy about it, but you stop and say, okay, so if we're stuck here, what are some options? What could we do? Who can help us? How can you help yourself? Those sorts of things. And when it's in a game and through play, our synapses are firing. The left side of the brain's working with the right side of the brain. Our nervous system is creating memory pathways and all those sorts of things. And so that's when we start to learn that behavior that we can use in the middle of a tricky situation. So I always say that social thing, how to introduce yourself, hi, I'm Rod, that type of thing. Some children don't even know how to do that, but it's an important thing, particularly to meet new friends. But what happens when the game changes, or if you like, the stress is added? So what do we do? How do we maintain ourselves or self-regulate through that? That's incredibly important. If you're seeing your child having really big emotions, nothing wrong with having big emotions. They're real, they're present, but it's really important. How do we work with them to bring them back to normal? And there's some amazing resources out there. One of the ones that I often direct parents to is the Merit Centre, and it's put together by Dr. Stuart Shanker, and he's got a wonderful website just dedicated to parents to give tips and tricks on how to help with managing big emotions.
Oh, we'll find that link and link to it in the show notes, and because that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, it's fantastic. His work around self-regulation is just such a delight, and seeing behaviour as thinking is really important. So rather than seeing it as misbehaviour, for example, your child is showing you through this big emotion where they're up to, what they can and cannot do, the fact that they've got to the end of their tether and they don't have any resources to bring themselves down. It's tough doing that as an adult when we're super angry, right? So imagine what it's like being a 4-year-old who's just having a crack at this for the first time outside of the family home. So this is why this stuff is so important from a that year leading up to school. If you'd come to think we'd be doing it from the moment you walk in the door. Because for me, it's so important to have that skill stretched and then stretched again for them to grow and grow and grow, because that mastery around that is vital. And it's across the lifespan thing, and it won't fail them from the first year of school to the last year of school, whether that's high school or whether that's tertiary education or whether it's postgraduate studies. It's the same stuff. So, yeah.
Now, my other question is, the book's about the first year at school.
Yes.
So during that first year, parents obviously play a vital part, as do the teachers. From your perspective, as having been in that kind of teaching and head of school position, what can parents do to help teachers in that first year?
I think the first thing is super, super important, that if you've got any concerns about your child, to reach out to the teacher in the first couple of weeks. Make a time and just sit down and share your insights. Parents are the ones that know their child the most intimately, and to share that insight with the teacher is so valuable. Don't just go to them and say, "Oh, can I just catch you? I just want to tell you a few things about my child." No, because that conversation, it's not respectful to the teacher's time, but more importantly, it's not respectful to the child. We take dedicated time to talk about really, really important things across all aspects of our life. And this is one of those times that is so important. So make that dedicated time, sit down, tell a story, bring some notes, bring a story, tell them about their journey, tell them about the things that are on your heart, and give that teacher the insight to be an equally powerful influencer in your child's life, rather than them having to play a guessing game or catch up. Because remember, your child is one of between 20 and 30 children. So anything that you can do is really helpful. Make that time and honour their role as the teacher, and share that journey in a time when both of you have set your focus aside to just be focusing on your child and their needs. But just that care and concern, I think that's number one. I think the second one then is just remember that your child will come home with stories from a 5-year-old perspective. If you hear a story, reach out to the teacher and just say, "Look, my child came home today and said that they've played with no one, they know no one, they've got no friends at all. Could you just clarify the situation for me?" And I'll say, "Well, this is what happened. This is who they were playing with. This is what they were doing. They were busy all day. They were hanging out with these guys. Amazing. Thank you." And then you can go back and say, "Oh, I heard you, you're playing on the equipment today with Joe and Dave." And I'll go, "Oh, yeah, that's right." And you're like, "Yes, that's not what you said before."
So that kind of partnership, working together
100%,
with the school, the teacher, and and remembering that they are 5-year-olds or 4-year-olds. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing, is be one of those parents that seeks first before being overwhelmed by what is often a 5-year-old's version of a complex situation.
That's a wonderful way to think of it.
It's not that their perspective's not right, it's their perspective and their truth, but there's obviously just, there's more pieces to the puzzle.
There's something missing at times, yeah.
Oh, there often is, yeah.
Yeah. What we'll do is we'll link to the book in our show notes. That's the First Year at School Essential Tips for Parents and Carers, which you've given us some wonderful gems. Thank you very much. I know my mummy heart is feeling much more relaxed about sending my big kindy kid off to prep next year. So I'm sure I'm not going to be alone. There's going to be other parents out there who are going to feel a little bit more relaxed and much more confident in sending their kids off to big school. So thanks, Rod, for joining us today.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Well, that's it for this episode of IS Podcast. Before we sign off for 2021, I'm joined by Natalie and Mike. It's been another big year in so many ways, and of course, we also launched IS Podcast.
Yeah, it's been a great opportunity for us. A year or a couple of years where we've been looking to connect with our schools in new ways, and IS Podcast has been a great way of doing that, to explore what's happening in schools, what's coming up, and it's been wonderful talking to all the different people on the show.
Certainly, because we covered so many different issues and topics, things from consent, why handwriting matters, supporting our kids in lockdown, even overparenting. We'd love to know what you want to hear more of, so send us an email and let us know what you want.
And finally, thanks to everyone who's joined us this year. It's been wonderful making this program for you, and we look forward to joining you again in Term 1 next year.
We'll leave you with a winning poem from our student poetry competition. Emma Jones, a Year 12 student at Tintern Grammar, won the Years 11-12 category for her poem Father and Daughter. The judges said it was an utterly gorgeous sensory journey through childhood with a stunning collection of images.
My name is Emma Jones, I'm in Year 12 and I attend Tintern Grammar. My poem, Father and Daughter, is about my dad teaching me to read as a child. My gentle father, with what must have taken extraordinary patience, used to turn the pages of the book, one by one. The curved edges of his voice, smoothed away by years of living in southern England, used to drift me to sleep. The elocution that is so distinctively his, every rise and fall of his tone, made my eyelids drop just a little further. Sometimes when he was away we would make recordings of his voice, so that I could listen and miss him just a little less. The audio occasionally interrupted, with a giggle, or a question I thought was clever, from when I couldn't keep quiet any longer. He didn't mind when I interrupted, and he still doesn't now, but infinite patience, never wavering. Eventually, our voices started to alternate, as I began to string first syllables, then whole words together. "Read it again, Emsley," he used to say, over and over, the same little books with pretty little storylines that had fairies and heroes and talking animals. "Now read it backwards, word for word," over and over, back and forth, until my words were as smooth as his. Grueling as his methods were, I am grudgingly grateful, for it is clearly an essential skill to be able to recite the Three Little Pigs backwards. Only joking. My gentle father still calls me Emsley, a nickname intertwined with memories of his colourful words, staining the ceiling above me into intricate patterns of endless adventures.
IS Podcast is brought to you by Independent Schools Victoria. It's produced and recorded by Greg Lawrence and Duncan McLean and presented by Michael Broadstock, Shane Green and me, Natalie Moutafis. Our podcast theme was composed and performed by Duncan McLean. You can find transcripts of our shows with links to what we've discussed at podcast.iseducation.com.au.